All right, so at any point now, we may be on YouTube. So welcome anyone who is here with us live this evening. This is the second series of the Material Memory Panel. And we are organizing this through the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project. All of the artists who are with me tonight are featured in the Collective Memory exhibition. The mission of that exhibition is to raise awareness about Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia through the broader theme of memory. And Alzheimer's disease and dementia is a degenerative disease of the brain that affects 1 in 3 seniors in America at death. So 1 in 3 seniors in the United States is dying with a dementia diagnosis of some kind. So it's a disease that affects many, many people. 6 million Americans are living with the disease, and there are countless caregivers providing medical care as well as in-home care for people who are affected. So we do a lot of different events that elevate art, awareness, and community. And this is one of a very special series that we're doing during the pandemic that is virtual, but also very accessible for people at home. So welcome to anyone who is watching live. I have 3 absolutely incredible artists here with me this evening. Coral Penelope Lambert, Stephanie Sarah. I should have asked your pronunciation of your last name before we went live.
It's
Lifshitz, and Katie Hovenkamp. So thank you, all of you ladies, for being here with me this evening. We're going to share a little bit about your work. And we're going to have questions and answers at the end. So anyone who is watching live, feel free to put those answers in the chat and we will get to them. Thank you so much. We are going to share my screen now. And I will bring up the slideshow. 1 second. And we are going to start with the artist, Katie Hovenkamp. So Katie, you can just cue me verbally when you want me to move on to the next slide.
No problem. Well, thank you so much, Rose. I'm really honored and just very excited to be a part of this. I think what you and Alzheimer's Glass and Iron is doing is just absolutely incredible. And, giving an opportunity for so many people to use art as a vehicle for healing, I think it's just an absolutely wonderful thing. I'm honored that you asked me to be a part of this, and I'm really honored to be accompanied with a couple really wonderful artists. So thank you for this. Yeah, we can go ahead and go to the first slide. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off with just 3 images that inspire a lot of the work that I do. So my body of work addresses how women are perceived in society today, how they were perceived historically. And then the ideas behind the piece are generated thinking about the idea of fairy tales. And what interests me in the idea of fairy tales in particular is the way the narratives are constructed and how the characters and the narratives are meant to teach life lessons, and how it's a relatable experience to all of us as we're growing up. To some extent, no matter what culture you come from, there are fairy tales that are meant to teach you about life lessons. And oftentimes we relate to certain characters, say like the damsel or the villain or the hero. There's so many different relatable characters that, we think about. And I like to think about those when it comes to generating ideas for my work. So that's why I showed this first image on the far left. Arthur Rackham is one of my absolute favorite illustrators. And this image to me is really compelling because you don't often see Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs depicted in this manner, where you have that moment of horror when she eats the apple, but then you see the dwarves being very nurturing and motherly to her, yet, they're all mourning at the same time. So I think the way that Rackham constructed that image to illustrate the aesthetic of the fairy tale, or that overall mood or feeling, was just really powerful. And I hope to communicate those types of feelings and emotions in my work, whether that be aspects of humor, aspects of loss, horror. So I really enjoy that dynamic he's able to achieve. The middle image is an image I use for the benchmark of creating really feminine works. So oftentimes with the work that I do, I use a lot of imagery that's kind of stereotypically feminine. So I'll pull a lot from like the Victorian era. You'll see a lot of imagery of bows or dresses or, just really dainty, delicate things, often translated into more like industrial materials. And then the image on the far right is a really interesting one to me because this woman has a really confrontational gaze, and she's sitting in what would be considered an improper pose in comparison to the image that we just looked at in the middle, where that's a form like more of a Rococo painting. It's really, beautiful. It's really delicate, kind of feminine. And in contrast, the image on the right, is more confrontational. So I like the contrast between the two images in the work. So I kind of walk a delicate line between delicate and feminine, but then also, kind of having something that's a little bit more charged and taking back that feminine imagery. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is the piece in the exhibition, and this is called Shelter in Sheer. This is cast bronze with nail polish. And with this particular piece, material was extremely important. And material is something I talk about quite often in my work. I teach at two different colleges. Currently I'm teaching at Keystone College and Northampton Community College. Prior to that, I was teaching at Harrisburg Area Community College and Penn State University. And whenever I talk to my students or, I'm thinking about my own work, material is something that is extremely important. Materials have a history to them. They can relate to various audiences. So I think whenever you're choosing a material to work in, it really needs to balance out conceptually. So with this piece, it was really important for me to work in bronze, cast bronze in particular. Cast bronze, to me at least, I think about how it's a material that tends to elevate. It's also a metal color-wise that feels like really warm, and it's got a lot of rich history. It's very archival, and I think it's just a beautiful material to work with. So a lot of the work I've been doing a lot of things with domestic materials or things that you find in the home. And I've been working on blending parts of the body with these utilitarian objects. A lot of these works are inspired by, what happens when you kind of recluse or live in the house for longer periods of time. Sadly, my mother was kind of reclusive before she passed away in 2018. And, I would see her and visit her probably like every 1 to 2 weeks. And, she would become so attached to the house, she would hardly go out, she was ordering groceries in. And that's kind of what inspired the idea of, blending the body with domestic objects. So this is a pair of scissors that I blended with a pair of fingers. And I wanted them to feel kind of like creepy or unsettling. So I had one of my students be the model for that. And I put those long acrylic nails on her and took a mold of those. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And, so just go back on material a little bit. So when choosing the materials, I also think about, their physical properties. And in this case in particular, I wanted to talk about an experience that was really important to me, that memories that have stuck with me for a very long time. And that is my upbringing in Catholic school. So I went to Catholic school for 12 years. I had nuns and a mixture of lay teachers as well. And I remember being really anxious in school a lot. And this experience, I feel like it really strongly shaped my entire body of work. And it was an experience where growing up, when you're in Catholic school, the teachers used to walk up and down the aisles of the classroom, and they used to inspect the students to make sure they looked well kept or they were proper, well behaved. And, if they looked untidied out, you get publicly called out in the class. So I used to get in trouble all the time because I was really into art as a kid, and I would have paint stains on my uniform. My hands would have paint on them, or my nails wouldn't be clean. And, the teachers would make me stand up and they would publicly call me out in class. And I remember specifically feeling so anxious and nervous about that, in my uniform, I almost felt like my own uniform was kind of choking me. And my uniform it was these Peter Pan collars with this jumper dress that we wore. Actually pretty similar to the image we're looking at here, where I have the Peter Pan collar, but the difference is these pieces are all made out of a combination of sheet metal and lace. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that a little better up close on how those are constructed. It was really important to use the material to have that heaviness or that weightiness, so the viewer could put their body into the piece, project their own body into the piece, and feel that sense of discomfort. So we can go ahead and go to the next. And again, continuing with the idea of just femininity and questioning what that is, this is a piece I created toward the end of graduate school. This is called Frivolous. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to collect as many materials that were associated with being feminine as possible. So I wanted the collection to evolve to the point where it would become extremely absurd or just overtake my body. I also wanted the piece to look like kind of like a wedding dress, but instead of it being a formal dress, it turns into this amorphous mass that just invades everything. Then we can go to the next. And then these next three works I'm going to show are reminiscent of what's going on with COVID. So this piece I made about a month and a half, 2 months after COVID really began. And so an interesting thing is with my current living situation, I inherited my mother's house. So when I was talking about that first piece and, seeing how she was living informed a lot of the making of that, that experience kind of crept its way back into the COVID scenario. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm in this kind of forced situation where, we're locked in the house, for our own protection. So I started to make some work in response to that. And this piece is called Behind the Curtain, where it's a wearable sculpture that, if I wasn't feeling so sociable that day, I could essentially take the curtains and hide behind them. And, again, just kind of continuing with that theme of blending the interior domestic space with the body. So we can go ahead and go to the next. And, this is a similar concept. And here I'm using the stereotypical white picket fence imagery, but I also made it a wearable face mask. So it's not only protecting, it's shielding me, but then it's also, fencing me in. And then we'll go ahead and go to the final piece where I started using actual safety gear in order to make the work. So this is a face shield, which at the time was extremely hard to come by because everybody was buying face shields left and right. So this took a couple months to arrive when I ordered it. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to use wallpaper to create my shield and lace to kind of decorate it. And with this face shield, not only is it protecting me, but then it's also making me oblivious to what's going on in the outside world. And I'm still continuing to work with this theme. The gallery that I'm working with is called Soft Machine Gallery in Allentown. And unfortunately, they were hit really hard with the COVID scenario, and they're trying to raise funds to reopen. But about a year ago, I was supposed to have a solo exhibition there. So hopefully things are going on for the summer, and I'll be able to continue this body of work and evolve on that. So that's everything I've got for my end of the presentation.
Absolutely incredible, Katie. And so amazing to see this new series in response to COVID that's come out. And I think that's something um, everyone on this panel this evening has really been making recent work in response to COVID. And you've all approached it in really unique ways. And I love the material poetics and especially the last three pieces about being fenced in and then kind of being blinded to what's going on in this world. And this last piece with the wallpaper, absolutely exquisite. So we'll get to a lot more questions at the end of this panel. But I am going to now introduce Stephanie, who is going to share about her neon work.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie Sarah Lifshitz. I'm an artist based in Brooklyn, New York, primarily working in neon these days. I'm really, really excited to be a part of this exhibition. I've heard a lot about the work that you all do for a while from a lot of mutual friends. And this is something that's very personal to me. I grew up in a household with great grandparents who both, ended up having Alzheimer's. And I feel really lucky to have had that influence in my life and also know what it's like to just be a part of someone's life when they are losing their memory and when they're changing. And it does feel really appropriate to have this piece in particular, which is the one that's included in this exhibition, because so much of my work is about my own memories and my own thoughts that are constantly coming back to me and haunting me. So with that, I'm really appreciative to be here amongst so many incredible artists, and I'll talk a little bit more about my work. So like I said, this is the piece that's in this exhibition. The text of the piece is, "I noticed the scar on the back of my hand, realizing that a year felt like no time at all." This is part of a new body of work that I started in response to COVID. When lockdown started in New York City, I did not go to my studio for 3 months, which was incredibly difficult. But I also really had no desire to feel forced into making anything. I spent a lot of time crocheting, knitting, just doing all of the projects I love to do at home, and then writing a lot more than usual. The way I normally approach my art practice, specifically with neon, it is all text-based, is that I write a lot in my sketchbook. And in the past, all of those writings have manifested into prints or sculptures. I usually try to think of the work and figure out which material would best realize it. But ultimately, it just seemed to make the most sense to directly tell the viewer in ultimately the loudest way I could possibly think of, with a bright blazing sign, just shoving it in your face. So most of the work has been the direct text from my writing. It wasn't until nearly a year after lockdown started that I started reviewing my texts and pulling out pieces that stood out to me and thinking about what they meant to me in that moment when I wrote it and what they mean to me now. And so this is an example of one of those pieces, still currently untitled. It just made me think about all the time that had passed. And I had this scar, I had this cut, I had this burn on my hand, and it just took such a long time to heal. And I never ever pay attention to work injuries and studio injuries. They happen all the time, and it's just a part of life. And I never really think about how much time we need to heal when we get hurt, and the fact that I never give myself that time as an artist in order to just become a complete human being again and work to my full capacity. So it felt strange watching my body heal with something so simple during a time when we all really needed to take a step back and, appreciate the importance of being healthy, and also the importance of being sick, that when you are feeling bad, you should really take that time for yourself and get better for everyone's sake. So that's where this piece came out of. We can move to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite pieces. The title is "By All Means, I'm Okay with Being Fine." And this piece meant a lot to me, and it still means a lot to me because it's something that I just kept thinking over and over again. And I still think about it all the time. As a woman working in the arts, and just in general as a person here in New York, I feel like I'm struggling all the time to be this ultimate version of myself that I can possibly be. And at the end of the day, I just want to be okay. And it was a couple of years ago that I took a step back and I realized that my life is pretty wonderful. I'm doing exactly what I love to do. I'm working in a medium that I love to be a part of, and everything's okay. And I'm just really pleased and content, and nothing can get better. And it can certainly get worse, and it has. So I just really wanted to appreciate that very simple sentiment. And this piece is very small. It's about 7 inches tall in 6 millimeter glass. So that's pretty tiny. And it's really important to me when approaching neon signs to specifically think about the size of the text as well as the color. I don't necessarily like to keep size, color, font uniform. It does change per piece as I think it's needed in that moment. And an interesting fact that I really like about working in a smaller diameter with neon, besides being incredibly technically challenging, is the fact that it does shine brighter than a larger tube size. So ultimately, the sign is physically smaller, but it's actually a lot more intense visually to approach and see. And that's something I really like. We could go to the next slide. They didn't care for me at all, but I don't mind. Titled, but I don't mind. This is part of a series of work that I was doing for a long time where I would just have conversations with people and then replay a thought or response that I had said or wish I had said as part of that conversation. You know, the ultimate haunting comeback or the ultimate haunting sentence that you heard in a conversation with somebody else. And it's just what would replay over and over and over again. And ultimately, that's what I would write down in my sketchbook. And eventually, some of that work became my actual pieces. And this was just after a really bad day with someone who I was working with. And I just kept thinking, God, they hate me, and there's nothing I can do about it. And this is one of the few times where I changed the gender pronoun because it was initially she didn't care for me at all. But something that I really approach when making these pieces and editing my writing is that I want it to be incredibly important to me, but I also want this to be something that anybody can read and interpret in their own way. They can always delve into the work a little bit further through titles or through seeing a full body of work or reading my bio. But I really want it to be a little more approachable and more universal. So in that situation, I did change something about the piece. And occasionally I'll do something like that. But for the most part, I pretty much stick to the original writing other than editing out text before or text that comes after. We could go to the next slide. After spending so much time focusing on making work about my communication and conversations with other people, I'd also been spending quite a few years fabricating neon for other people. That's fabricating for other artists and fabricating for businesses. And it's been really fascinating working as an artist and then also as a fabricator. And I really try to keep those lives completely separate. And it's also been especially interesting fabricating for other people, other artists who don't make any neon on their own, but get it made. And the whole experience of working with glass, as some of you might know, but if you don't, it's incredibly difficult. It takes a really long time to master these skills and techniques. I'm still well on my way. I've still got a long way to go, and it can be incredibly damaging and painful emotionally and physically. And this is just something that I wrote. This is something that I wrote when I was reaching a point of doing so much fabrication and also making so much work. The title of this one is "You've Been Getting More Than What You Paid For." And I felt this was really something that was on my mind in so many ways as a fabricator and also as a woman who was trying to navigate a lot of different aspects of my life, and the labor that I put into all those aspects of my life and the unpaid labor that I put in and I'm expected to put in both my work life and personal life. So this took a year. Yeah, this took a year of editing because I really wanted to just push out exactly what I was feeling in that moment. And finally I did that. So this is in bright white, and the whole piece is about 10 feet wide. And we could go to the next slide. And so I mentioned at the beginning, I've been making work lately using passages from my diaries and just pulling out little moments that stick out to me, passages that I continue to read constantly. So I'm just going to read this one. There's a woman in my driveway. She stands there most nights, evenings sometimes too, just taking hurried drags of her cigarette, peeking out over the side of the porch down at her house, from which she finds a few desperate moments of solitude. I never ask her to leave. There's a relationship that I formed with this stranger. We've never actually interacted, but she does stand in my driveway every single night, having a cigarette and peeking down at the rest of the block. And we formed this sort of interesting relationship where I'm comforted by seeing her there regularly, and we nod at each other. She knows I'm there, and that's pretty much it. And I was, as many of us have been, I have been so lonely this past year, especially during lockdown for so many months, with housemates that had left, and family that just wasn't nearby. I just spent so much time staring at neighbors, staring at what other people were doing in the privacy of their homes or in their front yards or down on the sidewalk. And having that connection meant so much to me, even though at the beginning, I was very nervous by seeing the shadow of a stranger standing in the driveway every single night. It was incredibly uncomfortable. It was a little scary, being alone at home. But once I saw who she was and we formed this silent connection, I loved her presence. And so from there, I copied my handwriting from this text, and we could go to the next slide. And that's the latest piece that came out of that. So that's sort of the process I've been working with lately, just really going back to these really personal writings, more personal than they've ever been, and pulling them out there. And I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you for being so candid. I really appreciate your piece. You've been getting more than what you've paid for, and your honesty with what is expected out of you from both your personal life and professional life as a female artist. I definitely, I think actually everyone on this panel may be able to relate to that, and giving more than what you're getting paid for.
Thank you.
So we will definitely, and I have so many questions for you. So we will do a big question and answer at the end. And now I'm going to introduce my dear mentor, Coral Lambert.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Katie. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be on this panel with you and to share your work. It's very inspirational. I think there's a lot of places where we connect as artists. There's some different themes coming out. I teach at Alfred University, which is where the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron project started. So I'm particularly happy to be supporting the project after 8 years, and I hope people follow through. I wanted to talk about iron as a material, iron as a vehicle for holding memory. In this image, I'm holding the iron and it's resonating through my body. Iron is often thought of as being connected to industry. Really for me, I find it essentially an ancient material. Iron is from the core of the earth. Iron was born in first generation stars. Iron is in our blood. So for me, iron is something that connects me to something much larger than myself. And the iron, when I'm holding it, when I'm working with it, when I smell it, when I taste it, when I feel it, it just does something to me. I've been working with iron for maybe 30 years. I've worked with other materials, but the iron resonates with the senses of my internal and my external body. Next slide, please. This is an earlier piece called Teardrop of Earth's Magic Memory. It's a divining rod. It's a tool. There's something about these objects that I'm making that are seeking something else. They're seeking to understand how things exist, how we navigate through this world. Next slide, please. This is just a table in my studio. I'm interested in how things come into being. So these are a collection of magnets and kind of examining the idea of weightlessness and alchemy, looking at contained space in the glass dome and the imaginary space through a mirror. Thinking about alternate universes where things of a normal nature, such as gravity, do not exist. Kind of like looking at how a dream world, or how we actually remember things, like Katie was talking about folk stories, and these ideas of narratives that, you know, there are ways that the universe comes together, but then there's ways that maybe there's it's not quite how we imagine, you know. So next slide, please. This is a series of books. The book library is called the Library of Lost Knowledge. And again, it's this idea of how knowledge is handed down, how stories are handed down. And here the information is coded within the cast iron itself. The title of the books are Mixing and Melting Cast Iron. They're technical books from the 1800s. But by casting the books in iron, the story and the technical aspects are actually in the books themselves. So how do you decode and read this lump of iron that was a book, but the secret is in the making of it? So the only person that could tell you, the only way you could find out is asking the person who made it how they got these recipes. So it's this idea of telling a story in a different way, or the language is not in text. It's completely opposite what Stephanie's doing with the written word. The written word now is in a lump of iron that you have to hold and read and feel and understand. I think some of the projects that Rosemary has done with the Alzheimer's Iron projects is about this idea of translating a story and then handing an object back. So the stories are within the visual language, or they're within an object that you hold and it resonates the story. Next slide, please. So again, these are results of some of those questions that I'm asking about, you know, defying the laws of gravity and looking at the properties of iron and metal. The memory of the iron is actually magnetic. When you melt metal, all of its memory is mixed up, and then it casts into an object. Over time, it will remember how it was at the beginning. I've done some work where we buried the iron pieces. They've been in the ground now for 20 years. So we'll go back and see if they have polarized to the polarities of the Earth again. So the iron literally has a memory that you can scientifically pin down. Next slide, please. This piece is called Black Star, and it features a net trapping a large meteor like a boulder. Again, this idea of defying reality, where the boulder is actually about, I think it's 700 pounds of iron, but it's, next slide, please. It's levitating up in the sky. I call this series Star Cages, and they're tilted towards the sky. Again, it's this idea of communicating with the unknown, or communicating in a different language it's a visual language, but it's also a very physical language. The one in the foreground has solar panels that activate LED lights. And so on the interior, you can see a constellation at nighttime. The title of that piece is called Sky Diamond. Next slide, please. So there's two main approaches to my practice, that of the object-based sculpture, which we've been looking at, and then some more process-based, site-specific sculpture. And I'm interested in these processes using fire and iron that parallel those found in nature, such as heating, cooling, and oxidization. And so the material is a living material. It's breathing, it's changing, it's growing. And the next slide, please. So these are from a couple of different performances that I've done over the years. And through the objects that are a result of the performances, I intentionally cultivate the traces of the making process to remain. And again, there was another link with Stephanie because she was talking about scars on the body, and I'm talking about scars on the earth, or scars that are left in the sculpture that by the process that actually echo the scars generated by our civilization upon the earth. And how do we heal those? You know, so to talk about the body takes a while to heal, but so these, what I'm hoping is that these performances both celebrate the wonderment and majesty of nature, but also examine the environmental issues. Next slide, please. This is most recent performance at Salem Artworks. This is an overview of the Star Factory. This is about 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was part of the Festival of Fire at Salem Artworks, which hopefully will be picking up again once COVID has calmed down. But the site was chosen specifically at a place where the sun rises, and at this particular time of year in September, there was also a waning moon. And the site at the top of the hill, you could see the village and the church. So again, it was setting up this narrative, which actually was a similar scene, a similar pastoral scene to the Van Gogh painting Starry, Starry Night. So the title of the performance is Starry, Starry Night. Next slide, please. And here you can see the Star Factory in progress. We cast, I think, about over 50 stars. They're about, 6 inches, 7 inches. And, the iron, we had 100-pound of iron, say, every 20 minutes. And so it was a continual, between the twilight hours of 5 o'clock in the morning until 6:30, we produced the stars. Next slide, please. As the stars were cast, they were carried up, they were cast onto a steel pole, and then they were carried slowly up the hill and then planted as the sun came up. So we were, as the sun extinguished the stars, then we created new stars. So we were like recreating what was happening. Next slide, please. So here you can see more stars being generated and the sun going down. Coming up, sorry. I was asked if I could do it at sunset, but there's something completely different about doing it at sunrise. It was literally like we were bringing the sun up as we were planting the stars. Next slide, please. And then this is the sun coming up, and they actually cooled down fairly quickly, maybe in about half an hour to an hour. There is a video of this that I'm working on. There's several sort of short clips of it out there. But yes, and the next slide, please. And then this is the moon. So now it's become an outside observatory where you can sit and people that were there that morning can tell the story, or someone else will tell the story of the story of the story, and it becomes a memory and it becomes a folk story. It's become a real place that people go and say, wow, did you see that time the stars were made? And then you can sit there and watch the sun come up and the moon come up and watch the actual real stars. Next slide, please. So this is a poem that I chose just to talk a little bit about the rust as well at the end of it. So even though the performance has finished, the sculptures are still changing and growing and rusting. This is by Sandra Flower. My friend, I met you on an iron grey day. Winter like smoke blew our landscape away. Quick as a yellow finch, time seemed to be too fragile for its capacity. A warm word, 50 spoken against air, made the momentum of it seem less bare. Still we were left to wander in the frost. I change it for rust. So I'll have to contact Sandra and ask her to change frost to rust. But like poems when their power to rhyme is lost. We could change lost to lust. Yeah, that's the next slide, please. And this is the work that I've put forward for the Alzheimer's Iron project. It's a new series of work I'm doing right now. I was lucky enough to be able to go on a residency and cast some iron at the Rivers of Steel in Pittsburgh. But the Crying Eye is one of a series of weeping sculptures made during the pandemic. We can recall memories of being with family and friends during better times, and the memories sustain us. I wanted to mark this moment in history with new work where we tell each other it's okay to cry, to weep, to feel. The earth cries, humanity cries. It's a time of transition, of letting go and making room for renewal, where our memories and dreams of past and present may collide. And next slide. So yeah, these are changing and growing as I'm working on them. I've got about 6, and then I'm just going with the flow, and I'm allowing imagery from my dreams to come up, and there's these snakes kind of overtaking the eyes and things floating around. But our individual memories are in the teardrops flowing with salt into the healing rivers that create a sea of collective memories. And this goes back to the earlier work that I was showing, that I actually made the divining rod in about 1998. So this idea of collective memory within the iron is still something that I'm investigating. And the object is physical and static, yet it resonates with life and tactility. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Coral. It is an absolutely amazing experience just to hear you talk about the material that is iron, and how eloquently you connect to that medium. But I think you have inspired the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project in so many ways, but really the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project was born out of the concept of Alzheimer's iron, and it was so inspired by the way Coral would speak about the medium of iron and how iron connects us. And we were very interested. When we began, we used to do iron oxide paintings with older adults, and then we would create the iron oxide paintings in a sculptural response in cast iron. And we really were thinking about how there's iron within all of us. It's beating in all of our hearts, and it connects all of us in a life force way. And I think I would be in a very different place right now had I not gone through the National Casting Center Foundry and been exposed to a lot of Coral's teaching. So thank you so much, Coral, for inspiring 8 years of the Alzheimer's Glass and Iron Project and inspiring countless people from all walks of life to become interested in the cast iron arts community. I think you really make it inclusive and very friendly to young female artists as well as anyone on the LGBTQ spectrum. So that is something I really thank you for really making the cast iron arts community inclusive. So we're going to do some questions and answers next, but before we do that, I just want to plug the last of the series of the Material Memory Panel. And that will be on Tuesday, April 13th, and it will feature two of Coral's former students, Maria Bentley, as well as Jenny Hillenbrand, as well as an incredible artist, Amber White. She is the inspiration behind this exhibition, actually, her work on making memories, inspired by her journey in the memory loss community. So I'm really looking forward to that panel, but while we are here, we are going to hear from these incredible artists now. So I will remove the spotlight, and then I saw one question in the chat, so I'm going to go to that one first. And anyone who is watching live, feel free to ask a question. This is from Amber White. She said, "This is for all of you. I am wondering if you feel memory is inherent in a particular material or if memory is made based on the human context." So anyone can feel free to answer that one or try to take a stab at it. And I might answer that one just to begin. I felt like, especially when the Alzheimer's Iron Project started, we were working with the concept of fleeting memories or fading memories, and we wanted to make them eternal. So I think for me that any of the cast metals really help to hold memory, just because you have to heat them down to about 2,000 degrees, 3,000 degrees before anything starts to happen. So it was really a way to take a concept and ensure that it continues to live on Earth. Of course, I'm on a panel with many metal artists who know how to melt those memories back down if they come in contact with them. Cora, what were you going to say?
I think any material can hold a memory. I think back when I was a kid and had a little teddy bear, and I can remember that. Yeah, and if that something similar to it or something turned up, that would hold a memory for me. So I'm wondering what the other question around that might be. Is, I think it's a very personal thing that, you could have a memory of an empty picture frame, but there's something that you impute onto that frame, and that becomes a memory. So, yeah, that's my simple answer right now, and I'm going to think on it a little bit more.
I really like that question, and it's got me thinking about process, because I think a lot about the significance of memories becomes even greater as I interact with an object. And then through art making, working with material and working through the process of making, that memory just grows stronger and stronger and stronger. And my association and emotions with that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. You have to spend so much time thinking back on what you're doing and also thinking forward to the product that you're making associated with whatever you're thinking about. And, our connection and our hands associated with something, I think, makes that memory great.
Yeah, I agree with both of your comments. I think, just kind of going back to talking about like material for a second, and, when Coral was talking about how iron, holds a lot of memories, but then the material itself heavily goes through transformations, and any material that you choose, kind of has its own lifespan, right? And memories themselves have lifespans, whether that goes from like your personal memories, or, you could even go back to thinking about like story, narrative, folklore, and how someone's particular memories or experiences get passed down through others. So I think like something to think about is like the idea of how, material can kind of, all material can be ephemeral to a certain point. It'll evolve and change over time. So I think with memories, time is just such a huge factor in how it lives and kind of evolves through different manifestations.
That is so eloquently said, Katie. I was curious if the panelists had questions for one another after watching the panel. If not, I'm going to start with rapid fire with my own rapid fire questions. But I was curious for Stephanie, what got you interested in the material of neon? Like what lit your interest?
It was entirely unexpected. I was getting my MFA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was in the 4D time-based work department. And before that, I had mostly specialized in print and photo. But the best part about my area in grad school was that I can work with any medium, and anyone in our area started off with a concept and then followed through with whatever medium was best able to realize that. And then separately, my studio happened to be down the hall from the glass department. I knew how rare it was to have a glass and neon department in a facility like that, and my access was unlimited, and that would never be the same, for the rest of my life, most likely. And I heard it was really hard, but I signed up for a class my second year, and it was incredibly challenging and incredibly emotionally difficult. But there was something about the process that reminded me so much about print and darkroom, that you had to spend so much time learning how to work with the material, and you're kind of always at the mercy of the material. And it was also incredibly meditative to work through something and then potentially and most likely have to throw it out. So especially when you're first learning. So I found the process of making neon really stressful and simultaneously relaxing. And then it was finally in my third year where I was just doing that whole thing of writing in my sketchbook. And there was this piece that I wanted to make, and the text that I had written associated with it just said, "Please be sad." And I was going through a lot of grief and emotions about loss. And I couldn't think of any way to realize this piece other than in text. And I just thought, like, why not push myself and actually learn how to do neon for real, to really go from being that basic beginner and just try and make some letters 1,000 times until I actually got some words out of it. And that's what ended up happening. I was really proud of that piece, and I still am, even though now technically it looks horrific to me. But that's what really made that first push.
Thank you so much for sharing your introduction to that medium. And it's incredible to see your mastery of that skill. I know you said you have a far way to go, but your text is absolutely incredible, Stephanie. And the sentiment behind the text is what really is so emotionally evoking for me as the arts audience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Coral, there's a question for you in the chat from Lauren that says, I'm wondering how place influences your ideas about memory, considering the clarity of the night sky in Alfred, which if you haven't been to Alfred and seen the night sky, I can say from my 4 years there, it is one of the clearest, most beautiful night skies I've ever had the pleasure of seeing. So Coral, do you want to elaborate?
Yes, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I know I talked over. How place influences your ideas about memories, considering the clarity of the night sky in Alfred?
Well, I'm not sure. The most significant night sky I ever saw was when I lived in Minnesota. And we would go and do a lot of iron pouring outside in the sculpture parks, and up in Wisconsin, and I would see the aurora borealis. And having come from England to this massive Midwest sky, I think that really had an impact on me. So I would call it the American sky, the American like Midwest sky with vast roads leading off into nowhere. That kind of space is what inspires me to try and take people to that space, like to get out of our anchor in reality. It's not, I'm not being escapist. I'm trying to get a different perspective, so that's, the sky in the Midwest is where I really saw the best sunsets and the best moonlights and moon shadow nights, stuff like that inspired some of these nighttime pieces. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Where coral was pouring out at the Franconia Sculpture Park in Minnesota, I will have to agree, has some incredible skies. And my first iron pour with coral was out in Kansas. And those were some, not the most beautiful night sky, but some of the craziest skies I've ever witnessed. So coral, I think, has some emotional atmospheric.
They were, yes. Again, it goes back to echoing what's happening in nature. So when you're doing something like making art in your studio, that's fine. But when you're trying to make art in a thunderstorm or where there's a tornado down the road, then you, like there was in Kansas, it does add that wonderful element to the work that you try and recreate sometimes. I think it's about a feeling of being alive.
Beautiful. And then, Katie, first I'm going to read a comment for you. Oh, and I see Amber White says in Poplar, Wisconsin. I'm sure there's beautiful skies there as well. But Amber White said to Katie, I am so sorry for the loss of your mother. I can relate, as I also grew up in I think she was saying Catholicism program, but I was too unruly for the status quo. So I also would like to echo, I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother. And I love the piece Shelter in Sheer and how you have related her experiences to your own experiences within the pandemic. And that is one of my favorite pieces in the show. There's something about it that is so, it sticks in your mind, I think, because it's such a, scissors are such an mundane object on everyone's desk or in everyone's studio. And then those fingers are so creepy. But it's an absolutely exquisite piece, and the casting quality is amazing. And I absolutely love the concept of sheltering in sheer. I was curious for you, speaking about materials, how is it, or what's the response you get in the art world, oftentimes pairing such a, it's not a harsh material, but cold material like cast metal with so many frilly lace and beautiful soft materials? You have a real conversation happening within your material choice, if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Sure. I really enjoyed kind of intertwining those materials quite a bit because typically you don't really expect something delicate to exist in a heavy metal format. And, you know, oftentimes, like when I exhibit the work, like currently I'm working on a new series that's called Kitchen War Room. And basically those pieces are all as if you turned your standard kitchen utensils into weapons of war. So like if the world was ending and you had to protect your space, you know, you'd have these weaponries made out of kitchen tools. And so these things that are heavily associated with women that aren't expected to be made out of like heavier industrial things, usually I get people saying, oh, okay, that's cool. You could actually use it as a, a functioning heavy duty thing, or I get some excitement behind that. And then, other times I'll get kind of, humorous comments like, oh, this is if, Rapunzel decided to go to war and this is like the weapon she'd have, or this is the thing she'd wear, or, this is the tool she'd use. So yeah, that usually gets a pretty positive response. And some people kind of think it's a little hilarious to have the feminine material be translated into an industrial thing.
I will never forget one of the first times meeting you was at the 8th International Cast Iron Arts Conference in Latvia, and you were doing a performance there where I believe you had cast a handkerchief.
Yeah.
Cast iron. Do you want to talk a little bit about that performance? That was an incredible experience to see your play on a lightweight object then becoming metal and becoming heavy. So if you want to just talk a little bit about that, I would love that.
Sure. So the idea behind that piece was in the olden days when women kind of wanted to court men, they would purposely drop things. I mean, I guess in some movies you still see a little bit of that today, but traditionally it would be dropping something like a handkerchief on the ground, and then, either a woman or the man picks it up, and it's just a way to kind of engage another person to interact. So, doing that with a heavy metal object, I was thinking, okay, well, it's kind of a burden to do this ritual of trying to attract another person, or it could be exhausting, or it can be kind of overwhelming. So it was really important to translate that material into iron. So it almost felt like an actual workout doing that. So as I was doing the piece, I did the piece for probably about an hour and a half. And the piece weighed about 7 pounds. So it would take a real toll on my body as the piece was progressing. And that was really important to kind of show that burden of trying to kind of win someone else over. So the material and my body's reaction to it were both really crucial elements. And I was quite sore for a day or two after that one.
An absolutely incredible body of work. And I really encourage you, all of these artists' websites are linked on the Alzheimer's Glass and Irons Collective Memory Exhibition. And we've seen a snippet of each of these artists' work, but they have an incredible and robust body of individual work, each of them, that I really encourage you to check out on your free time if you're watching live or if you're watching later. Does anyone have any last questions for each other before we sign off?
I have one question for you, Rose. What's next for the Alzheimer's Iron and Glass Project? How can people support it?
Yeah, so we as everyone else's are navigating the pandemic and how to safely get people back into the hot shops as well as studio when we get back and running. But we have plans to do some castings. I am currently an artist in residence with the Memory Maker Project. And we are going to cast older adults' hands who have been isolated during the pandemic. So people who haven't had really any human touch in the last now over a year. We're going to bring a lot of attention to the older adults who have been isolated during this time. So that will be one project, but we're going to continue to have online events and online exhibitions. We're hoping to have another exhibition this fall, so people can be on the lookout for that and possibly submit work to that. And yeah, when we work with studios and deem it safe, we're really hoping to do some more of our children's workshops, children's memory bubble workshops. But we are planning carefully, and we are kind of waiting out this pandemic until we are able to do another big residency or big in-person event. So stay tuned, stay updated on our Instagram, social media, or our website, and follow along. But we have another month of this exhibition. We'll be doing artist features, and of course, please come to the third panel in the Material Memory series, and that is Tuesday, April 13th.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, thank all of you so much for being here with us this evening. You are all incredible artists, incredible educators. And maybe the last thing, if anyone has any other virtual programming or events coming up or exhibitions coming up that you would like to share about? Does anyone have anything on the horizon? No?
I have one coming up. I'm in a show coming up next month called Violent Devotion, and it's in Hamilton. It's near Hamilton, New Jersey. Actually, it's in Bound Brook, Hamilton Gallery. I'm sorry, I'm mixing things up. So that's coming up for me.
Wonderful. So it's an in-person exhibition?
Yes.
Very cool.
And I have a solo show coming up at Northeast Sculpture Factory in Minneapolis, and that's going to be May 15th to June 15th. It's called Alternate Worlds, and there will be a new release of the video for the Starry Starry Night and some of the stars there. So that's in Minneapolis.
Will that choral also be online at all this year, the new Starry Night?
We will put some stuff online, yes, but it is an in-person exhibition.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm just teaching public workshops, and a lot of them have been virtual through Urban Glass in Brooklyn, New York. I'm currently in the middle of one right now, but I'd say keep an eye on the Urban Glass website and Instagram page to see what's coming up in the future.
Thank you, Stephanie, so much for plugging Urban Glass. I will also be teaching a workshop on May 6th with Urban Glass called The World of Opportunity. So I've recently got my master's in nonprofit management with the focus in arts management. So we'll be looking a lot at funding opportunities in the arts world, particularly for Glass artists, as well as navigating the grant writing cycles and grant follow-up. So I encourage you to take a look at that workshop as well while you're on the Urban Glass website looking at what Stephanie is doing. But once again, thank all of you ladies so much for being with us this evening. Thank you for anyone who's watching live and who's watching later on as well. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night, and stay tuned on the Alzheimer's Glass and Irons Instagram page for more artist features from the Collective Memory exhibition. Thank you so much.